Well, I think it's probably good to kick it off now. We're at 45, and I'm just going to give a quick intro. So we'll leave some time for more folks to join. So welcome to the CDOT Introduction to Beaver Ecology and Management Tools webinar. For those of you who don't know me already, my name is Becky Pierce, and I am CDOT's headquarters wetland program manager. I also want to welcome my wildlife counterpart, Jeff Peterson. He's CDOT's wildlife program manager at headquarters. And Jeff and I have put together this webinar, which has been sort of a second stage in our activities in bringing more information on beaver ecology and management techniques to CDOT staff. Last year, no, I believe it was the year before, we had an intern, CDOT had an intern who studied nationwide and actually internationally also techniques in managing beaver activity with coexistence in mind with infrastructure and transportation. And she put together a wonderful resource for us. And some of you were probably even interviewed by her on CDOT's activities. And that report can be found on our website, Environmental Programs Branch at CDOT. And so Jeff and I wanted to take that further. And so this is where we're at right now with the webinar. We wanted to provide information to staff so we could make better decisions. And also in the hopes that we could bring in the future a training, an in-field training session on some of the techniques that Mike and others are going to cover today during this webinar. And so I hope this is really interesting to you and informational. If you do want that training in the future, you'll probably be on our list for folks to sign up for that in-field and in-person training. We don't know when it's going to be. We haven't actually planned it yet, but that's the intention. And then also another thing that Jeff and I are going to seek out in the near future is a pilot project or two in sort of testing some of these strategies for CDOT itself to test, basically, to look into. And so I guess that's probably it. I'll turn it over to Mike. Mike Callahan is the president of the Beaver Institute. He also has a consulting firm, I think you'd call it a consulting firm, a private company called Beaver Solutions, and he will talk a lot about that today. So, and I'll let Mike introduce the other folks who'll be talking today.
Thank you, Becky, and also Jeff for putting this together. And, I know how valuable everyone's time is, so I'm going to do my best to make sure that you find that these 2 hours are going to be well spent. And we're going to talk a lot about beavers and how to manage them and how to make your lives easier when you do run into beaver issues and why it's important to do so. So I started with beavers till 1998 on a volunteer basis, and that then started a business, Beaver Solutions. I'm over here in Massachusetts, which is a bit different from most of Colorado. We're the third most densely populated state in the country. And because of that, we have a lot more conflicts. So over time, since starting a volunteer group in 98 and starting Beaver Solutions, my company, in 2000, I've put in over 2,000 devices to resolve beaver problems. And most of those, vast majority, 3/4 of them, are road culverts. Beavers love plugging up road culverts, as many of you probably know. So I'm going to use that experience today to go over what works, what some of the limitations are, and just how this can best help you out in Colorado. I have a second Beaver hat, which is, as I was introduced, as president of the Beaver Institute. I started the Beaver Institute back in 2017 in an effort to try to share this knowledge and teach other people how to do it. So hopefully you'll find this helpful. So I'm going to go over the agenda, where we're going to start off with some basics about beavers, and because it's valuable to know more we know about beavers, the better we can manage them, and why it's important, the benefits of keeping them around. So why it's worth the effort. Then obviously the road issues that beavers can cause and how we deal with them, and move on to the topics of beaver trapping, going through flow devices, the devices we install to control the water and prevent problems. There's different types. We'll review that. I'll have some testimonials from colleagues of yours that will hopefully, show you why this is valuable to do, the successes of them, when they work, what the costs are. A study that we did with the Beaver Institute over a 20-year period that compared trapping and removing beavers to putting in these devices as far as the cost and the effectiveness. And then we have the Beaver Institute has a lot of self-help materials that are on our website. We'll show you those. And also, there's a referral system where you can find professionals. We have trained 3 people to date in Colorado in these techniques, and I believe all of them will be here, and we'll introduce them in a little while. And then wrap up with, I'd like to just give you an overview of process-based restoration. You probably will hear that term if you haven't already batted around. It's getting very popular in regards to beaver habitats, and then a little bit on permitting and a surprise at the end. So why are we here today? Well, to understand that, we got to go back in time a little bit. So I wanted to go over a little bit of what's happened with beavers over the last few centuries. Beavers used to populate pretty much everywhere you see the green on the map. And then Europeans came, moved across the continent. The trappers were actually the first white folks to come west. And as they did, they removed most of the beavers because beaver fur was incredibly valuable back then. It was like currency. You could trade it for guns, food, whatnot. And and Europe had wiped out their beavers, so there was a huge demand for North American beavers. Fortunately, when they arrived, this prehistoric beaver was no longer roaming North America. I wouldn't even be doing this work if it were. So this over a million years, over a million years ago, 275-pound beavers were roaming around. So thank goodness now they're only 40 to 60 pounds. But there were, when the Europeans arrived, up to 200 million beavers across the continent. And now there's probably estimates about 30 million, and they've been making a comeback, basically because fur kind of went out of fashion, and that's why they were trapped to near extinction, and different land uses. So what happened was, it was basically every stream across North America almost had beavers on it, and then they were wiped out. And then when Europeans followed and settled these areas, they settled in areas that were devoid of beavers for the most part. So we built houses, roads, whatnot, in places that were traditionally wetlands from the beavers. And that's a big part of why we have some of the problems we have now, because we've built things in floodplains, and then the beavers come back and try to dam where their ancestors did, and we have conflicts. So as right now, fur prices are very low. You can hardly even give away furs, and so that has helped beaver populations start to rebound. Depending on the region of the country, there's big differences in how many beavers there are. Out here in the Northeast, we pretty much have beavers in most of the habitats where they can be. Certainly out west, with concerns about water shortages and other issues, there's more interest in having more beavers. So if we by understanding why beavers do what they do, then we have a much better chance of managing them successfully. And beavers basically are aquatic mammals. They're our largest rodent in the continent, up to 60 plus pounds for adults, and they they require water for their safety, and they've evolved to build these dams in order to create ponds for their safety. They don't eat fish. Some people think that. One cool thing about I think about beaver anatomy are their teeth. When you think about how they can take down trees, 3 feet in diameter or more by just biting through the wood, it's pretty impressive. And their beavers are rodents, so their teeth never stop growing. And the outer side of the tooth is orange, believe it or not, because it's impregnated with iron. And then the back side of the teeth, the incisors are white, a dentin, just like ours. And so when they chew, the outer side wears down slower than the back white part of the tooth. And so it's like self-sharpening in a chisel shape. And it's just pretty cool. I think that's how, so as they chew, their teeth always keep growing their whole lives, being rodents. So they self-sharpen and they prevent their teeth from getting too long. They mate for life. And if you see a beaver pond, there's typically only one adult and one female who mate, and then there'll be up to 2 years of offspring. And they'll have anywhere from 1 to 6 kits, baby beavers a year, and typically 1 or 2 will survive. So on average, you may have 4 to 6 beavers in a pond if it's been there for a few years. Then once the young beavers are 2 years old, they move out to find a mate. So that's where there is a fair amount of mortality when they do that. And that it happens more in the spring, that the young ones will move out to find a new territory. And we'll talk more about that when we get to trapping. Beavers are territorial. They won't let other beavers in their area, and they typically will put scent mounds around the perimeter for usually about a half mile or so, staking that out because they're trying to protect their food supply, and they don't want non-family members coming in, beavers, to eat their food. They don't hibernate, so when the ponds freeze over solid, they will hunker down in their lodge, and they don't see the light of day for months if there's ice that they can't break through. So they'll live off the sticks that they store at the base of the pond. And those sticks they harvest in the fall. So you'll see a lot more activity, both cutting down trees, building up the height of their dams, and storing sticks in the bottom of their pond in the fall. And so it's not unusual that we get majority of calls in the fall when the beavers are the busiest. They have a bunch of aquatic adaptations, which are pretty cool, which help contribute to why they prefer to flood out an area and live in it. So it's protecting them from predators, but the anatomical things they have is, they're very thick fur. That's why their fur was so desired for making felt top hats and other type of felt back in the day. They have 2 sets of lips, so they can eat a stick like they see in the picture without getting water inside their mouths. Their eyes have a second membrane that when they're swimming, helps protect their eyes. Their feet are webbed in the back that they can propel with. Their tail can be used as a rudder, and their ears and nose can close. So they're very comfortable in the water, and probably haven't seen any land that they wouldn't prefer to see flooded. So why do they build dams? Beavers, as we just talked about, are well adapted to the water. So they'll use the ponds for protection from predators. They evolved back when there were saber-tooth tigers, wolves, all kinds of things that would predate on them. They also, when they build a dam and flood out trees, they can then swim up to those trees from the safety of the water and cut it down, and it makes it easier to transport the branches once they limb out the trees. And then they'll take those sticks and bring them to their, to build a dam or build their lodge. And also where there's winter ice, they will store sticks under the ice. And so the deeper the water, the more that food they can stuff under the ice. These dams can be pretty impressive. I mean, it's amazing without tools what they can do with just their hands and their teeth. This dam is tall, over 6 feet tall, about 8 feet tall, and they're very difficult to pull apart too. The sticks are all woven, and the mud and rocks are stuffed in there. It's pretty impressive. Now, because beavers have been around millions of years, and their dams flood out areas and really change the environment, they're second really only to humans in how much they will change the environment to suit their own needs. Tons of other species have adapted to the changes that beavers create on the landscape with these ponds. And so these beaver ponds are very valuable ecologically. They slow and clean the water. They help sink water into the ground to recharge our aquifers and maintain the water table. They will, by slowing the water will drop sediment and help to fill in eroded streams. And they are magnets for all kinds of wildlife, plant, animal, insect, you name it. And because, I'll get into that in a second. Also, these dams, by slowing the water, help plants and bacteria take pollutants out of the water. Heavy metals, nitrogen and phosphorus are taken up by algae and other plants. And as I mentioned, sediment is deposited. Often, these dams will help contain toxic spills or bad runoff from mines, just by helping to keep the water in place and slow it down. What really hooked me with beavers back 25 years ago was when I learned that it's not just keeping the beaver around, it's all the other benefits, especially to all these other species that the beaver habitat supports. So biologists refer to beavers as a keystone species, one of a few in North America, where, like the arch like with an arch, the keystone's that top stone. If you remove that, the whole arch collapses. Well, if you remove a keystone species like a beaver, the whole ecosystem collapses. So that, to me, is a major reason why I enjoy trying to find a balance where we try to protect human interests, but keep the beavers around whenever we can. And along those lines, I'm going to just show you this.
We know that rainforests and coral reefs are critical in sustaining the health of our planet.
Yes.
In North America, beaver ponds are equally as valuable. Beaver wetlands serve as a haven for native species, a refuge for biodiversity to recover and expand. They save endangered species, store water, decrease wildfire damage, sequester carbon, and clean the water in our rivers, streams, and bays. Your local beaver pond is your rainforest, your coral reef. Join us in protecting and expanding them.
actually have a question too, whenever you're ready for it, Mike.
Okay, let's do it.
Someone asked, do beavers have large talons?
Not really. The they have small talons, I guess. They're more like fingernails, and their hands are very similar to human hands without the opposable thumb. So they can grab a stick, they can grab a stick like this and nibble it, or they can dig for mud and pack it into the dam. So they're very dexterous hands, but not really claw-like. Thanks for that question. We do have a question, so why don't I start off with that? Are beavers suffering from interbreeding because their habitats are fragmented? It's a good question. Beavers will disperse. Well, miles when a beaver becomes 2 years old, sometimes three, become sexually mature, and they will want to leave their parents' pond and find a mate in their own habitat. So they can travel along streams or even over land miles and miles to be able to find a mate. So there's probably it's probably not a huge issue if if the beavers are in fragmented areas, but obviously the less genetic diversity there is in the general pool, then that could be an issue. But I haven't seen it studied, um, and what's also interesting in that regard is that studies have shown that if one of the breeding adults dies, well, then the surviving adult will sometimes, believe it or not, mate with an offspring. So you would think that would be really bad for inbreeding, but somehow they've evolved with that, and I guess
Mike,
that's
do you mind if I jump in a little bit here?
Yes, please.
Hi. I know I haven't been introduced yet. My name's Ali Vitello, and I'm a Beaver Institute member, and I also have a background in ecology and evolutionary biology. And I just wanted to add slightly more context to that question because I think it's a really good one, and especially here in the Rocky Mountain beaver population. What this person is commenting on is that we have seen that there could be a lack of genetic diversity in beaver populations, but like Mike alluded to, it's very understudied. So we actually don't have a good characterizing study or compilation of studies that tell us about the existing genetic diversity of beaver populations. But based on the fact that they were almost completely extirpated from the US, they almost went extinct. That implies that we had many small founder populations, so potentially populations of just several beavers in one location. And that would lend to potentially having lower genetic diversity. And what some of us suspect here in Colorado is that that could have led to certain populations, whether, maybe we have a Northwest population, a Northeast population, a Rocky Mountain population, having certain issues with resilience to different sorts of disturbances like diseases. And so here in Colorado, we suspect that tularemia wiped out a large proportion of our beaver population in 2015. And all of this is very suspect, right? Like, we don't know for sure, but that doesn't seem to be an issue in other populations. And so it could be that that has to do with the genetic makeup of our population. So it's not really a yes or a no answer. It's more of an ecologist. It depends. And there's a lot of context here, but I think it's a really astute observation of whoever asked that question, that there's a lot going on genetically that is left not studied yet.
Thank you, Ali. Much better answer than I was able to give. So thank you. That was Allison Delgizzi. She said she's been trained through the Beaver Institute in these techniques, but has her own business, Arable Earth, is it Gunnison? Allie?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
located in Gunnison, but work around the western slope.
Yep. And Paul Planer is also here. You'll be hearing from him hopefully at some point. Who's also in the same area, and Mark Beardsley too. So thank you those three for being here and helping me out. So beavers have all these benefits, but there's always a but, right? But we're not here because of just that. We're here because we know that beavers can cause problems too. So there's a variety of issues that beavers can cause for humans, and we're going to focus obviously on the top one, road flooding. The road flooding is probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the calls that we get in my company, Beaver Solutions. But nevertheless, there's all sorts of other things with, utility lines, railroads, homes, septic and wells, irrigation ditches, wherever there's water, beavers can dam it up and often cause us problems. So, um, there are a variety of different ways to approach beaver problems: short-term, medium, and long-term solutions. We're going to focus mostly on the long-term solutions today, but I'd be remiss not to go through the whole gamut. So the short-term solutions you're all familiar with: removing the dam, clearing the culvert, removing beavers, relocating beavers, that can solve a problem, but the habitat's still there. Beavers will come back in. And then most of what I want to focus on are the different types of water control devices and how you can protect road culverts and prevent road flooding issues. So for short term, dam removal, beavers are very industrious, right? They can build a dam and in a very little time back up a stream so that it's flooding a road or just expanding. And while that's a good thing out in where it's not impacting infrastructure, obviously it's a safety issue when roads are getting flooded. So removing that dam, whether it's by hand or with machinery, can drain the water away and resolve the flooding issue. But the beavers will come out typically in the evening all night long and rebuild the dam like this guy's doing here. And so removing the dam is a quick fix, but typically if the beavers are still there, it isn't going to last long. So they'll have the water right back up quickly because they want the water. That's, they built this for a reason. They feel safer. They're more able to access food from the water. So they will repair it. The other thing that you folks will see regularly, I'm sure, is that damming a culvert. So any culvert, whether it's a pipe, a box culvert, stone box culvert, you name it, even a bridge, beavers, when they swim up to that, probably think that the roadbed's a dam and the culvert is a hole. And so with a little bit of work, relatively speaking, they can patch that hole and create a big pond, because that's what they've evolved to do in their own dams. When typically when they first come out in the evening, one of them will patrol along the dam, and they're listening and feeling for any leaks. And if they detect leaks in their beaver dam, they'll grab mud, sticks, and patch those leaks to maintain the dam. So they do the same thing with man-made structures. If water's escaping and they want more water, they will plug it up. And it doesn't take them long to do that. And so now we can muck that out, but it takes them very little time to completely plug a culvert. And if they get to that point where the culvert's plugged, then obviously there's problems. The water has nowhere to go but up. and flood a road and can create serious flooding issues, especially in the winter when cars will track water and the road will ice up. Or even worse, the water finds a different way to go and creates a sinkhole and the road collapses. So obviously, these are all things that we want to prevent. And, when a culvert gets plugged, we usually don't know it until it's an urgent situation. We called out, and this is a job we did for Mass DOT, water going across the highway. And nobody wants that. And then the water's high. It's hard to find the culvert. Never mind unplug it. So,
Hey, Mike. Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Before we got a couple of questions that came in.
Okay, great.
It's almost at exactly the same time, although they're somewhat different questions. The first one is someone mentioned they had heard that beaver deceivers and beaver dam analogs are not very effective and only a short-term solution. And I'll give you both questions now, and you can take them in the order you want, if that's okay.
Okay.
So that was question one. And then the second one is about, they use the term survivability after relocation. I assume that means after you relocate a beaver, do they survive, or is it bad odds against them or good odds in their favor that they survive?
Beaver deceivers that's a term that refers to what we call flow devices typically. It was coined by Skip Lyle, who's a biologist working for the Penobscot Indian Nation in Maine, and he pioneered some of these techniques. Those we'll be doing a deep dive on those, and I'll show you the success rates when they're done properly, which are excellent. Beaver dam analogs, on the other hand, are a completely different animal. And we're going to touch briefly on those at the end of the talk. Beaver dam analogs are not something that are meant to resolve conflicts. What they are is they're man-made dams that mimic beaver dams, and they're primarily used for restoring eroded streams and reconnecting the water to the floodplain. And again, we'll touch on that more later. So both types of things that are very effective when done properly. Unfortunately, people often think, this isn't rocket science, but there are a lot of nuances and details that need to be done properly. And so it's not unusual. People try doing things themselves and they don't really know enough, and then they fail. But as you'll see as we go on through this talk, there are definite ways to do it right. And so in my business, Beaver Solutions, when we put in these flow devices, we will guarantee them, give them a money back guarantee. That's how effective they are. So I hope that answers that. The other question I see, are there estimates regarding survivability after relocation? Yeah, that's beaver relocation used to be a darling idea where, we got a problem with a beaver. Well, we'll just put it somewhere else where it can do good. And then it's like a twofer. We solve a problem and then we have benefits where we put the beavers. But there aren't a lot of studies, but the studies that have been done have shown that there is probably, even when done properly, there's probably about a 50% survival rate. And, mountain lions, just a variety of things that can impact the beaver surviving in a new environment. So while it's still a useful tool, it has to be used judiciously. And it's always better to try to keep the beavers in place and manage the problem in place so that you don't have to relocate them. And that's what the flow devices do. this is something we want to avoid. Beaver plugs a culvert, and you remove it enough, they'll go under the road and start damming. And then it's even harder to unplug it. And as you can see, with that, you're using a lot of time, labor, machinery, and potentially damaging the infrastructure in the process. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say. And so that's what we're going to focus on here. So let's see. One way to stop beavers from plugging inside the culvert is to put a grate on it. And while that will work, it actually makes it easier for the beavers to then dam up against the grate, and you still get the block culvert. So it makes clearing it easier. You can come in with a machine, just scoop out what you can, lift the grate, flush it out. But again, not great environmentally, and labor intensive, and tying up a machine too. So the good news is that it's rare that we can't protect a road culvert from beavers. There's a variety of techniques that we'll be talking about, and almost always we can fix the problem, and the beavers can stay there and just dam in other spots where it won't negatively impact infrastructure. Talk a little bit, not a lot, about the medium-term solution of trapping. There's lethal trapping and there's relocation. And either one we could go into a long conversation about. But trapping or lethal control, shooting or trapping, it's kind of a traditional way to manage beavers. If you're having a problem, get rid of them. In my experience, I will recommend removing the beavers in about 1 out of 4 of the calls we get. Most of the time I can recommend a more long-term solution, but there are situations where we have built things that in a floodplain, and there's just no room for the beavers to build upon. For example, here, that flooded backyard is also the home to a leach field, which is underwater. And this flooding was caused by a dam that was no more than 2 to 3 feet tall. And so there really is no room for the beavers to have a pond and for the leach field to be able to be functional. Nowadays this wouldn't be built, but it's there, and so we have to deal with it. And that means this is an area where we just can't have beavers damming, and I would recommend trapping. There's different types of traps, and it varies by state, what's legal, what's not legal. This is a live catch trap called a Hancock trap, and this is used when beavers can be relocated, because it's like a chain link suitcase. It captures them unharmed. The beaver will swim in, hit a trigger, and then it captures them. They have to be checked in the morning, and then the beaver is taken. In states out here in the east, it's illegal to relocate beavers, so any trapped beaver has to be killed. Out west, where there's less beavers and more need for them, many states allow relocation. And in Colorado, I believe that is overseen by Parks and Wildlife. And here's another type of trap, a conibear trap. It's similar to a mouse trap where it's spring-loaded. The beaver swims through, hits the wires, and it's killed.
Hey, Mike, we have a question in chat. Tularemia, is that how that's pronounced? The illness.
Yeah, the parasite. Yeah.
Yeah, the parasite. So that word I can't pronounce was cited from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, aka CPW. Hold on a second. As the reason for euthanasia in lieu of relocating to prevent the spread of that disease. In particular, taking city beavers to the country. Has CPW updated its guidance? And then Becky chimed in. I don't think Mike mentioned why the West we should need beavers. Can he please touch on that? So there's 2 questions for you.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, tularemia, that is an intestinal parasite. There's another one called Giardia and another called Cryptosporidium. And they can cause intestinal diseases, vomiting, and diarrhea, and can be pretty nasty. I've had Giardia a couple times in 25 years. Fortunately, there's an antibiotic that within 24 hours I felt better, but I don't recommend it. It's, vomiting and diarrhea is no fun. And if it's an infant or someone who's immunocompromised, it could be very serious. So it's not something that we want in our water supplies. One problem, though, is that beavers are mammals that can carry it. Humans can carry it. Lots of mammals can carry it. Wading birds, muskrats, there's a lot of vectors for these parasites. And when they're transmitted through stool into the water, and then someone drinks that water or gets it in their mouth and can get infected. And beavers are easily identifiable in a pond, whether there's a dam or a lodge out in the water. And because they're known to be able to carry it, then like open water reservoirs often won't let beavers in there. The interesting thing is that I worked for 20 years as a physician assistant before I got into working with beavers, and I used to treat people for Giardia or these intestinal diseases, and about 1/3 of humans carry this, Giardia I'm talking about, without symptoms. And so beavers and other animals usually will catch it with a septic system or inadequate waste disposal from humans gets contaminated by, flooded by water. So it's complicated. I'm not as knowledgeable about tularemia, but that it's a like with anything, you want to use caution, and if it's it's hard to treat the water if it gets contaminated. So often the animals just removed ahead of time. I hope that answers it. I don't have
I think they were asking about the guidance from CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, about relocating beavers because of that.
Okay.
And has that changed or been updated?
That I don't know. If Allie or anyone else who's in Colorado has information on that, feel free to pipe up, but I don't know what.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I was actually just typing out a short reply. And I'm not, I don't work for CPW, so I don't want to completely speak on their behalf, but my understanding is that tularemia does remain a point of concern for relocation within Colorado, as do several other diseases. And particularly because we do have we have somewhat resilient beaver populations compared to certain parts of the United States, but compared to somewhere like the Pacific Northwest or New England, we have much smaller beaver populations that are less resilient to disease. So it is a concern for land managers to move them around. The other thing that compounds this issue is that we actually don't have adequate holding facilities for beaver. So even if you had a CPW personnel who was completely willing to have beaver moved, but they wanted to confirm that that beaver did not have tularemia before moving them, most locations across Colorado do not have an adequate facility to hold that beaver safely until that testing can be completed. The Methow Beaver Project is an excellent example of a group that does have those sorts of resources, but that's a Pacific Northwest group. So I know a lot of CPW personnel would like to have beaver relocation be an option, but they also still tend to maintain a pretty conservative perspective, especially when moving beaver between different watersheds. So sometimes in certain areas, you'll have the CPW personnel, and you're going to have to contact your local CPW office to see where they stand on this. Maybe within a certain watershed distance, they're okay with the relocation, but not watershed to watershed, and also not CPW section to CPW section. And I'm not perfectly well versed in how they divide out, but those are all things that can vary here in Colorado, and definitely getting in touch with your local CPW office is the best way to understand how their regulations or how that office handles it.
Thank you. Once again, very helpful. Thank you, Allie. Becky's question about, let's see, let me find that again. Oh, about why the West needs it. Yeah, the population, it's a question of population density is one thing. Out west compared to out here in the east, the beaver density population is much less. And also you have more issues with water, less, we have the issue with too much water sometimes, and many places out west, as you know, is short of water, whether it's less snow melt or less precipitation and just a need for more water and wildfires, you name it. So for a variety of reasons, beavers can help with a lot of those issues of water scarcity and wildfire risks in particular. So because the carrying capacity of the land traditionally was much higher for beavers, within the limitations of human development, it'd be beneficial to have more beavers on the landscape. I hope that answers that. Yeah, so again, CPW is the resource to go to regarding, trapping and relocation and lethal removal. There's a variety of pros and cons. Removing beavers is traditionally what people are comfortable with because that's what was done traditionally. If it's in the late in season, the winter, the fur is thick enough where it could be utilized. And if there's a trapper on staff, then it's not, that saves a lot of money. But the cons of removing the beavers, we've kind of already touched on. New beavers will often move back in to an area that was trapped. It depends on the overall population density. As I mentioned earlier, 2-year-olds move out to find a mate. So typically in the spring, we'll see that happen where new beavers will move into a place that had just been trapped. They rebuild the dams using pretty much the same location, and we're right back where we started. And so that repetitive nature of needing to trap and repeat trapping indefinitely will make trapping usually less desirable as far as cost goes over time. And then obviously we remove the beavers, the dams are going to erode and drain out, and we lose the wetland benefits that the beavers were creating by building those dams. And in some areas, it can be a PR issue where people like having the beavers there and don't want them removed. So any other questions before we move on to the meat of the talk as far as different water control devices?
One just came in. I grew up on a ranch, seen and dealt with many beavers in many different ways. Flow devices seem like a great option, but how do they stay unplugged? As I understand, the beavers will continue to work and problem solve until the water is flowing over the top of their dam.
Excellent question. Leads us right into this next section. So, if they're designed and installed properly, the beavers almost never will be able to plug them up. And so I'll explain why that is and then coming up now. So flow devices, there are a variety of types. I'm just going to touch on the 4 most common that we use and that could be helpful for you. The first one, a pond leveler pipe. That is a specially designed pipe so beavers can't figure out how to plug it up, that is installed through a beaver dam. And that controls the water level at the height we put the pipe at. That's very effective for freestanding beaver dams. The other 3 types are very effective for protecting man-made structures, primarily road culverts, but it could be a man-made dam spillway or a drainage structure of any kind. The culvert fence, the fence and pipe system, and the decoy dam. And we'll go through step by step of each of these and how they're built and why they work. Overall, you'll find that using these devices will save a lot of time, money, and they're in place 24/7. Like when beavers are removed, you never know when new ones are going to come in until all of a sudden the dam is built or the culvert's blocked and there's a flooding issue. When built properly, they require minimal maintenance, like an hour per year. They end up being very cost effective because they'll last many, many years with minimal maintenance. And obviously, if we're keeping the beavers there, that's helping the environment in a variety of ways. So it's definitely the most environmental friendly way. This is from testimonials from primarily highway superintendents that I've worked with. I just want to let you hear in their words what they thought of this.
We've been inundated with a lot of beaver issues. We've got approximately 6 areas. They have fences. 4 of them have the leveling systems in them, and they've been working great.
Since you put the 7 Beaver Solutions devices in for us, it's cut down on my men going to the sites and checking them every day, and it has also stopped from sending equipment over to pull them out. It's cut our payroll down significantly.
Since the installation, we have had no problems with the road being flooded whatsoever. Cohabitation has been a success. The beavers have maintained a certain pool level, and we've had a road that's high and dry and passable for vehicle traffic. So overall, it's been a great experience. Definitely a great guy to work with, and certainly a proven system.
We've had flow devices in town of Westford for 7, 8 years. We have 7 or 8 of them in town. They work great. When I first got them from Beaver Solutions, I was a little skeptical if they were going to work. Nothing ever works that great until you see it work, and they did work. We've saved so much money on manpower alone, with 2 guys every day going out checking these beaver screens, and nothing ever works. We have to clean them every day. Once we get these flow devices in, that all stopped, saved us a ton of money, ton of man-hour time. Beaver Solutions comes out, specs them and repairs them a couple times a year. We don't have to do any work to them at all. It's just been a great success for us.
Well, it saved us a lot of money. I mean, I don't know exactly what we were spending, but backhoe and operator for 2 hours is probably $70, $80 an hour. So, that's quite a lot. Keeps us happy because the water still goes under the road and doesn't wash it out.
Let's start with the pond leveler pipes. So as I mentioned, these are very effective in freestanding beaver dams. And that's, we use the same type of HDPE pipe that's often used with culverts, either single wall or dual wall. And that cage up there we fabricate from concrete reinforcing mesh, and that, as you'll see, goes around the intake of the pipe. So here's a diagram of the pond leveler when it's installed, and as you'll see, the intake end is surrounded by that fencing sitting on the bottom of the pond. The pipe goes up and goes through a notch that we dig in the dam down to the level that we need to keep the pond at. And it doesn't siphon, it flows by gravity. And so when the pond level is above the high point of the pipe here, water will spill out. And we will protect the backside so beavers don't stuff that end up. When they swim, so when we build it, we'll build it on land next to the dam, float it out on these temporary pontoons, and then sink it in the deepest spot. And the couple concrete blocks weight down the plastic pipe down to the bottom of the pond, and then you can see water's already spilling out of here because the pond is slightly above that. If the pond rose, this pipe would flow much faster. It's not pressurized, but like I said, it just flows by gravity. One limitation of these pipes, well, there's a couple I'll mention. One is you need to have at least 3 feet of depth out here. This cage is about 4.5 feet tall. And the reason we want at least 3 feet of water out there is that we want that fencing submerged enough so there's enough submerged surface area so that when this pipe is flowing full bore, the beavers swimming by can't feel or hear any water going into this cage. If you build this in a way where the beavers can't feel or hear water going into this pipe because the fencing keep them far enough away, then they'll leave this end alone. You never have to clean that end off, and any leaves that float up against it will float away because there's no suction. There's no discernible water flow through that fencing. And the water will spill out the back side of here. This fencing will put on there and then bury this so that the beavers can't get at the outflow end of the pipe. The other limitation can be if it's a huge watershed, then you have to have enough pipe capacity to handle the amount of flow. These pipes, it's important to realize, don't have to be sized like road culverts. They don't have to be to handle 5, even 50-year storms, because big storm events will any flashy event or runoff in spring will go up and over the dam, whereas you don't want water going up and over a road ever. But with a beaver dam, it's okay. So long as the pipe is sized so that it handles the flow 95% of the time, it'll keep the water level of the pond down to where you set the pipe at. And then there's some room for fluctuations with storms, but you don't have to worry if a big event comes. It'll just blast up and over. Hopefully that makes sense. Here's an example where we were working for the utility. They had this access road here, had about 3 feet of water on it from a beaver dam that was built over here on the right side of the screen. So we put in a pond leveler through the dam, way down to bring it down those 3 feet, and you can see how much it dropped. And then what was flooded like this was reduced, and they regraded, and then the road was dry. There was still some ponding on both sides of the road, and there's a culvert right here, but the beavers weren't able to detect where the water was leaving, so it controlled the water level so that this road stayed accessible.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Another question here. A couple of things. Let's see. Are there specific examples of successful relocations in Colorado? If so, patterns or reasons why they were successful? Also curious about any previous water law conflicts resolution regarding management changes, beaver removal, flow devices, etc., that altered the local hydrology.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Sure.
Mike, can you flag that question for later? Just because I want to stick with the pipe talk right now rather than jumping back to that. But I do want to answer that as best I can. Thank you. So anyways, so this pipe went through the dam, lowered the water. Several years later, you can see the dam's all grown in now, and the roads staying dry. ultimately, after like 4 years, the beavers started plugging up the culvert under this access road. So we ended up putting a culvert fence on that. And but for years, there you can see it there. I think there's the fence. But yeah, so that worked. Any questions about the pond leveler pipes? So take those now.
I don't think we have any
Okay.
about pond leveler pipes as of this moment.
Okay, I'll jump back to that relocation question then. So relocation is not legal in many states, including out here in the East, because they don't want our population of beavers is such that there's really not many places to put them, and they don't want people moving an animal that might cause a problem for someone else. I know that when I first started doing this work, there was a woman, Sherry Tippy, some of you may have heard of her in Colorado, who was very successful relocating families of beavers across the state. I'm not able to speak to the specifics in Colorado as far as relocation. All right, so I guess I'll just move on to culvert fences. As I mentioned in that last slide, that's one way to protect a road culvert. And when done properly, they work very well. This diagram, basically, if you think like a beaver, the culvert is an easy spot to dam. To them, the roadbed is a dam and the culvert is a hole in that dam. And with a little bit of work, they can create a big old pond. So they're smart that way. They will build their dams in spots, whether they're natural or man-made, where they can get the biggest pond for the least amount of effort. So that's why working for highway departments, state and local, is what we do the most of. When you put a fence on a culvert, it takes what was, say it's a 3-foot diameter culvert or more. It turns it into a fence with a perimeter of, say, 40 feet. That's a lot more work. And so what will typically happen is the beavers will choose a different spot. The culvert is no longer an attractive place for them to dam, and they'll find the next most attractive place, which could be upstream or downstream. And that may or may not be an issue, but the fence is designed to protect the road, and will do a good job at that. They work for basically three principles are important for an effective culvert fence. First, as I mentioned, it's a long perimeter. Instead of several feet, you've got 40 feet that the beaver has to dam all around. So it's a lot of work. The second reason would be beavers can feel or hear water flowing into the culvert. They want to plug that culvert, but the fence forces them away from where they want to dam, which is over here. You can see some mud down here where they had started damming. If they're real determined, they'll start damming out on the fence. That's why we'll make the length of the fence at least 12 feet. If you make it 6 or 8 feet, the beavers may not give up before they get to the corner. And if they get to the corner, they'll go all the way around. So these fences really should be typically 12 feet on the side. The third reason is that if they are determined, they start damming out on the fence. If we can flare the sides out into this keystone or trapezoidal shape, what'll happen is that the flow of water through the fence decreases the further out they get, because the opening gets wider and wider. So more water's coming in through here rather than through the sides. So those three reasons combined really help to eliminate or significantly decrease the stimulus for beavers to want to dam on that culvert.
Got another question, Mike, when it's a good moment? Let's see. Does a wide box culvert make a less desirable place to dam than a large round culvert?
Excellent question. beavers look for pinch points. So the narrower the constriction, the more likely they are to dam it. There was a study in New York that showed that the wider the opening, the less likely it would be dammed. So, and if the opening matches the bank width, for example, a bridge or a very wide box culvert, then the beavers really don't have a lot of incentive to dam there, except for the fact that on the sides is the roadbed. So they still, but then they'll often dam out in front of the culvert. But if a round pipe culvert is embedded into the ground, it's really the width where the water's flowing through that's important. So if it's embedded and you've got the full diameter, that may be just as effective as a box culvert. The problem with many pipes is, especially the metal ones, they're corrugated and on the inside, and that creates riffling and noise, which helps draw the beaver in. Dual wall, smooth bore culverts, whether they're plastic or concrete, make less noise and therefore less of a stimulus for beavers to damming. But ultimately, it's the movement of the water that's most important. If they sense water flowing through somewhere and they want to hold that water back, then they'll be motivated to dam no matter what you have there. So yeah, if the box culvert's the full width of the stream, that's the ideal. But obviously, big culverts like that are more expensive and not always, and all the old culverts are much smaller. So hopefully that answers that.
We got another question I think that you might want to go back a slide or two on. It says, in that example, is there a reason the fence is placed inside the T-post and not on the outside?
No, the fence post can be on the inside or the outside. When installing it, I usually will have them on the outside just because it's easier. But in this case, it doesn't really matter. So long as we use 9-gauge galvanized wire to attach it. And so long as it's securely attached to the post on the inside or the outside doesn't much matter. You would think being on the inside is slightly preferable because then the weight of the fence is being supported by the entire post rather than a few wires. But in practice, it really doesn't make much difference. So here's a case where the highway department had been cleaning out this culvert every day, pretty much, except weekends, because beavers kept plugging it up. And they had put this grate in front of it just to make it easier for them. But every day they'd pull it in the morning, flush it out, come back at the end of the shift, put it back, and that night the beaver would dam it up. And it was been going on for so long that after I pulled up and started staging my materials here, the beaver swam up. And, beavers normally are primarily nocturnal, but not exclusively. And they learned that every morning, the highway crew was opening up and draining their ponds. So they adapted and they started coming out first thing in the morning. And while I was working there, that beaver just went in and out carrying sticks, just doing what it did every day, is replugging that culvert. We put on this relatively smaller fence because we want to keep water around the whole perimeter. If I made it too big and went out here, the beavers would just dam off that land. So ideally you want to have a couple feet of water around the whole fence. And this fencing is 6-inch by 6-inch mesh, which is kind of a compromise between being big enough that a lot of leaves and stuff will flow through without clogging it up, but small enough that a beaver can't fit through carrying sticks to get to the culvert. There are exceptions. Small ones sometimes will, but yeah, so there's also a floor of fencing here because beavers are good diggers and we don't want them just tunneling underneath, popping up inside because they'll do that. So we really have to enclose that whole thing. So, yeah, so and that, that work, what happened after we put in that fence is that the beavers just went up here and dammed, and this was undeveloped and it was no problem. So the culvert and the road were protected, and the beaver ended up having their pond just a little further back from the road. And that's not unusual. Sometimes you can't flare out the sides because there's not enough water. And so here we just customize it so that it fits the stream, so there's water all around it. Whenever we can, we'll put in wildlife passages. What's interesting about beavers, you can build these passages for like large turtles or other animals, and beavers will use them too. But if you build it so they have to go up on land, they often won't bring sticks out of the water, up on land, and then back into the culvert. Some do, maybe 20% of the time they don't get the memo, but it's an effective way to allow for wildlife passage when you're fencing off a culvert. Here's an example of 3 different wildlife passages. This is a one-way door, so any animal that came in, if it worked its way around, could push its way out. There's a side passage over here. Let me see. Where animals can go in and out and up on land. And then there's a third passageway over here where we fence off these 2 culverts. We put fencing on the backside, basically to keep animals out of these 2 culverts. When we allowed them to pass through this open culvert, because so long as these culverts are open, that water level is not going to rise. And it doesn't matter if beavers put a few sticks here because it's not going to change the water level, and it just keeps it open for wildlife. Here's another example of the side passage where animals can go up and over. And we've got videos of all kinds of animals using these, including beavers. That 6-inch by 6-inch mesh is actually big enough for, seen raccoons go right through it like it wasn't even there, but large beavers can't get their hips through. So it's a good deterrent size for them. Any questions on the culvert fences? Okay, I see we've got just over a half hour to go, so I'm going to try to get through these and probably have to limit some of the questions. So fence and pipe system, basically it's a pond leveler with a small fence on it. We let the beavers dam on the fence because we put in a pond leveler that will carry the water. And this is probably our most common way to protect culverts, but it's only effective in areas where we can tolerate 3 feet of water somewhere upstream, usually within 40 feet of the culvert, so that the pond leveler won't flow until there's enough water to hide the flow over here. So here's an example where my nephew we build it on land. There's the culvert and the fence behind it. When it's installed, the water's coming in through the pipe here and discharging inside the fence. Beavers can dam on this fence. It's not going to stop the flow of the pipe, and big storms can flow up and over and through an unblocked culvert. We stop the pipe short of the culvert so that we have 100% capacity of the full culvert. And if the beavers are going on the other side of the road, we'll put a small fence on the back side of the culvert just so they can't come up there. Here's one. Sometimes we need more than one pipe. The pipes we use vary from 8 inches to 15 inches, and sometimes we need more than a 15-inch pipe. So here's 2. And despite all the noise that these pipes are making as the water comes out, beavers which had been damming the culvert stopped, and they just dammed out here, even though there's a wildlife passage where they had access and would go through. And it's just interesting. We gave them, we raised these pipes up a little, gave them some water out here, which was enough where they were content to stop blocking the culvert. Here's an example of, how beavers will use the passageway. And what I found interesting is beavers do a lot by instinct. Young beavers, even orphan beavers, they have some damming abilities and some behaviors, but they're trained by the older siblings and adults how to build dams and whatnot. But they can problem solve, and you see it coming up in this clip where there's this baby beaver and it's having a hard time going down the slope. So the next night or shortly thereafter, it decided it had a creative solution. It jumped on the tail of its parent and just took a ride down instead. So that's cool. These beavers were pretty much going back and forth every night, and never bothered with the culvert, and that's pretty typical. Usually, even though there's water flowing through the culvert, they have their pond upstream and they've got water downstream. They'll just use the culvert as a passageway. Okay, let's see. Any questions on the fence and pipe?
Just got a question. It says, I wonder, let's see, another one just popped up. I wonder if the high turbulence discourages them from building dams in the last example with the 2 pipes.
Interesting theory. Maybe. Don't know. I don't know. It surprised me because you would think, and we have seen other sites where beavers have tried damming the culvert, and there was turbulence, but I don't know. It's a good question. I'll have to think about that.
I was wondering if the reason they don't block the culvert is because it would make it hard. The wildlife passage is so narrow, they can't carry long branches in their mouth through that, where they can.
That's a big reason. Getting up out of the water instead of swimming with it, having to carry it up on land and then down is definitely a deterrent. It doesn't stop them all, but it stops most of them from doing it. You're right.
Just lost a question as it scrolled up the screen here. Hold on, we got one more for you. Do these devices usually require annual maintenance?
Yep, and I'm going to get into that in just a minute. But usually for all these devices, they typically need no more than an hour per year unless something goes wrong, which can happen, but it's unusual. All right, so last one. This is a quick one, a decoy dam. This is something that I love because it's something you guys can do yourselves. It doesn't take much for materials, and it's pretty straightforward. Basically, what a decoy dam is instead of having the beavers plug the culvert, we create an even easier place for them to dam out in front of the culvert. And we do that either with putting a fence posts out usually about 10 feet away from the culvert. So with fencing and maybe put a little woody stuff on it to start the dam for them. And then they'll usually build on top of it. Or if it's an area where there has a lot of big rocks, just making a rock wall will work. So here's an example. Under this dam is a fence, and beavers had been plugging up this 12-foot culvert, box culvert regularly. Highway department kept knocking it out. We just put this fence out in front of it and put some sticks and stuff on it. And the beavers went for it. They built it, and they got their pond up here that they wanted, which wasn't negatively affecting anybody. And you can see here there's a worn path. They're still going open over and through the culvert, but they haven't this has been in place 6-7 years, have, knock on wood, never dammed the culvert because they had what they wanted with this dam. Here's an example where this culvert under a highway had been, you can see the stain marks, had been plugged for a long time. Highway department opened it up, water drained out, and we put in this fence, put some debris on it, and within 2 weeks, it looked like this. They had it built right up and had regained their pond, but you can see the culvert's open, so big storm runoff could go through and we'd have full capacity of the culvert under the road. Sometimes we'll put a small fence because that's all we can build. There's not much room, and we know it's not big enough to really deter the beavers. But if we build a decoy dam, in this case, it was a little bit of rock wall and sticks immediately upstream, then the beavers will dam up there, and we have the culvert again protected, and the beavers have what they want. So this is nice because you don't have to maintain these decoy dams. You're just kind of instructing the beavers where it's safe to dam, where it won't mess with the road. There's another one. Here's the state highway. This culvert was plugged, and they didn't know beavers were here until it was too late. Water was actually going over the highway. You can see how much it drained out once they finally were able to open it. We just put this simple fence here, and that, they didn't even dam on it. That's just leaves that have been floated up against it. There's this wildlife passage here. They were still able to use the culvert, and it's worked well. So real quick, obviously in your region, costs are going to vary, but to give you a ballpark of what it costs out here for us to put in these devices, and for maintenance, depending on the device, like the pond leveler pipe, we check once a year, just because in the spring we want to make sure there wasn't any ice damage, make sure the pipe is still set at the right height. The fence and pipe, we like to check in the spring and fall, basically to keep it clean inside the fence, but also to check on the pond leveler. The culvert fences, we monitor the most. We'll check those 3-4 times a year, because if floated debris builds up on those, then the beavers will figure it out, even though it's 40 feet in perimeter. If it's a natural dam starting to build, they'll add to it. So those have to be kept clear. And so 3-4 times a year, get in there, just pull off the stuff and keep it clear. So we typically, the cost depends on how far of a drive it is and all that, but it's pretty inexpensive if we maintain it, but it's something anyone can maintain. So here I want you to just know that you can go to the Beaver Institute website and get self-help materials on all these devices. There's videos, instructional videos, how to build them. There's tool and material lists and whatnot. It's not ideal because there's a lot of nuances to this, but if there's nobody in your area, if Allie or Paul or Mark are not near you, or we're always trying to train more people, but if there's no one available, this is an option. Also, we have a Beaver Corp training program. Well, we have a help desk, so that's something that is free, where you can call and have questions answered. And this is a screenshot from our website, and it takes you to a contact form. And there's the website page for that. And then the Beaver Corps program, which Allie, Mark, and Paul are very familiar with, having graduated from it. And there we give people, it's in-depth training on each of these devices, how to build them, and then one-to-one mentoring remotely. This is all done remotely, so that even though I'm in Massachusetts and we're all spread out, we can train people and do train people all across the country to do this. So that's something that you can contact us through the website and get more information on, and we're always eager to train more people in these techniques. Kudos to our three. I think they're all here. You already heard from Allie. I know, Paul, if you are in the Gunnison area, please reach out to them, or even beyond. If you have questions, contact us through the help desk, or even they can help you if you have Colorado specific questions. Paul and Allie, was there anything you'd like to say at this point, or I know we're getting late in the day.
I just comment real quick on those decoy dams. Another thing to think about is a lot of nonprofit groups are looking for ways to get volunteers involved. And so if you guys have a volunteer, like program coordinator for CDOT, that's a great way to get community involvement. Those are relatively simple, easy structures to set in place, to maintain, to monitor. And so that's a great way to get community involvement with some of these devices, that specific one.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, and even if also, like Mike said, if you're far from Gunnison, it's not realistic for Paul and I to come help out, we're generally really willing to answer questions and at least point people in the right direction. So feel free to reach out if you have questions, even if you don't think you're going to hire us. We're okay with that.
Thank you both. Site assessments. I want to touch real quickly about a site assessment because that's part of our training in the Beaver Corps program, is trying to assess what sites make sense for flow devices, what sites really they're probably not going to work. And in my experience, about 1 out of 4 times, I'll recommend removing the beavers. That's always a last resort, but sometimes it's really the only viable option. And some of the reasons I won't recommend these devices are it can be very tough if you have a very flashy or high volume stream. Any river, at least the way they're named out here, we won't even try piping because there's just too much water you have to move and too much pipe capacity, and it just gets cost prohibitive to be able to put in enough pipes to handle high flows. Like the picture I showed you earlier, if we have a development or agriculture or something that is right in the floodplain and there's no room for any ponding, then unfortunately the beavers aren't going to be able to be tolerated. And another, irrigation ditches, drainage ditches, or canals can be very challenging because they are uniform. They're man-made and they're uniform. So I learned this the hard way, where I pipe a beaver dam in a ditch, and then the beavers built 20 feet behind it. And then so I extended the pipe, and then they built 20 feet behind that. And it was just going to be an ongoing chasing them. And so we had to remove the beavers. There are some situations where you can work it, but it really is site specific, and in general, ditches aren't going to be good places for flow devices. And then we touched a little bit on water supplies, where beavers typically are not tolerated. The success rates of these, now it's going to vary depending on your region and the beaver population in the area, because that determines how quickly new beavers move in. Out here, we usually see new beavers moving in, as you can see, within a year or two. Almost over 3/4 of the spots that have been trapped have beavers again. And so, whereas that's the blue for trapping, with the flow devices with minimal maintenance, your success rate continues, pretty much indefinitely. Usually the fencing that we use, it's epoxy coated, will last 10 plus years. Depends on the water conditions, but after, say, a decade, then the fencing has to be replaced versus having to retrap every year, 2 or 3. And based on that, we did a 19-year study that looked at 55 sites that we had conflicts with beavers in one town in Massachusetts, Billerica. And of those 55 sites, 43 of them we had flow devices, and 12 we had to manage with trapping for various reasons. And over the time, when you analyze the costs of the installation of the device and the maintenance versus the cost of trapping, the trapping sites were more work and more expensive for the taxpayers than putting in these devices. So not only were these devices saving taxpayers money versus getting rid of the beavers, but we were also giving the town, millions of dollars in ecosystem services from all these wetlands that were maintained versus being drained out by getting rid of the beavers. I want to finish real quickly. Permits, it varies a lot from state to state, even county to county, town to town in some places in the country. Out here, we have very strict wetland regulations, so it can take a week or more to get permission from the towns from the wetland people to get permission. Generally for road culverts, though, permits aren't needed out here. And from what I understand from my research and talking to Mark and Allie and others, Paul, about permitting for wetlands in Colorado, that generally isn't, that flow devices don't need them. Trapping is overseen by CPW, so that's, their regulations, they're the ones to refer to for that. But the Army Corps, I understand, isn't really involved with wetland permitting to protect culverts and putting in these flow devices. And then because, it already came up here, so some of you are hearing about these low-tech process-based restoration. I just want to touch on that, even though it isn't used to protect roads and infrastructure, just so you have a general idea, because it is beaver related. And the idea being that when beavers were removed from the landscape, their dams were no longer being built, and a lot of streams got badly eroded because there were no checks in it. The water just flew through and cut down into the ground, and there's been millions and millions of dollars trying to restore streams. But it's been shown that using these low-tech processes, building fake beaver dams, putting wood in the channels, help to put more natural flows back in place, is really taken off as far as a really viable and cost-effective way to restore streams. So you'll hear the term BDAs, which stand for Beaver Dam Analogs, or PALs, Post-Assisted Log Structures. These are man-made woody structures that are put in the streams that help back up the water, slow it down, and when they do that, the streams don't have as much velocity. They drop a lot of the sediment that they're carrying, and it helps to rebuild the eroded stream bed. And in some places, they're so eroded that the water tables drop so far that the surrounding vegetation just is more desert-like. And but as the stream bed fills in with the sediment, then the water seeps out in the water table. Vegetation eventually grows back, and the floodplain starts to get reconnected to the stream. And instead of a single thread, you start having, meanders and side channels and more of a lattice work, the way it typically was prior to having the beavers lost from the system. And as the vegetation returns, then ultimately it's suitable again for beavers to come in and start building their dams on top of the BDAs, or and just finish the job and create what it once again, a healthy ecosystem with that supports a wide variety of species and really slows and sinks a lot of that water that we don't want just running off. We want it to hold on to it more. So, and so finally, we have an international beaver conference every 2 years, and I'm happy to announce or to state that we're going to be holding in Boulder the end of late this year in October. So hopefully there's going to be a lot of really good presentations, some field trips, and some hands-on stuff. So hopefully some of you will be able to make it there. So a quick review, we went through some of the basics about beavers, the history of how we got to this point, what beavers used to be like on the continent, and how they are making a comeback, and the reasons why that's a good thing, but also some of the reasons why that can be a bad thing. And when it is a bad thing, when it's affecting the roads or other man-made land uses, some of the options that we have to find that balance. Because ultimately, the more we can balance and work with nature, the more likely we are to have a long-term and sustainable solution. So it's definitely working with nature rather than against it is in our best interest. So coexistence is, whenever possible, going to save us money and be more environmentally friendly. We also talked about the trapping, the different types of flow devices. You heard about the testimonials and the various success rates of trapping versus the water control devices in the Bill Ricka study. And please do familiarize yourself with the Beaver Institute website. There's a lot of information there. There's a library with all kinds of information. We have a YouTube channel. There's different programs we do, including BeaverCon, which I said is coming in October to Boulder. So, and then the Beaver Core training program. It is, as I mentioned, it's something that can be done remotely, so you don't need to come to us. We can meet and train people, and so they go out in the field and be confident and competent in putting in these devices. So with that, wrapped up with process-based restoration, and fortunately, unlike some states, you guys are smart. The permitting requirements are minimal, it seems, so and as they should be, because it's basically maintaining existing infrastructure in a way that's as environmentally friendly as possible. So it should be as easy as possible to get permission for that. And so any questions in the last few minutes that we have?
You mentioned that beavers have a large mortality rate when leaving the nest and establishing on their own. Is this the result of human impact on their habitat? Is there anything that we can do to improve this when working near beaver habitat?
Yeah, good question. When beavers move out, I've read some studies where first they'll do some exploring. They'll go upstream, downstream, and then figure out which direction looks the most enticing. They don't want to travel far because they've evolved when they're with predators, so that's still ingrained in them. But now with less wolves, with less mountain lions, other predators, that isn't as big of a reason. Crossing roads is a big one. They do most of their traveling at night, so it's often, and they'll go through culverts whenever they can. But roadkill, particularly in the spring, is something that we notice. So anything that we can do, well, certainly not blocking off culverts with grates. And when we put a fence on, trying to have a wildlife passage to reduce not just beaver, but any animal roadkill is an important thing to do to minimize our impact. All right, well, once again, thank you, Becky and Jeff, for coordinating this, and DOT for sponsoring this talk. Michael, thank you for your able assistance. Couldn't have done that without you. I gave Mark credit, and he's not even here, but he did help me with the planning of this and give me some information. Of course, Allie and Paul, thank you for being here. And especially thanks to everyone who sat through 2 hours of me droning on. So I appreciate your interest. So with that, thank you all.
Thank you, Mike.